Have you ever wondered why certain patterns keep appearing in your life? Why some relationships feel like watching the same movie over and over again? Or why, despite your best efforts, something always seems to be holding you back from your highest potential? What if I told you that the most transformative journey isn't found in ancient temples or sacred mountains, but in the depths of your own inner darkness, where your greatest treasure lies hidden, waiting to be reclaimed? I'm Alex, and today we're going to explore the forgotten spiritual art of embracing your shadow self, the hidden pathway to wholeness that mystics and wisdom keepers have understood for centuries. 3 years ago, I found myself in a beautiful meditation retreat in the mountains. On the outside, everything looked perfect. I was teaching spiritual practices, helping others find peace, building a community of light seekers. But inside, a storm was brewing. During a particularly deep meditation, as the incense smoke curled through the air and the ancient bells chimed, I was suddenly confronted with a part of myself I'd been running from my entire life. Not a gentle whisper, but a roaring presence, my own deep-seated anger. Not just mild frustration, but primal rage that I had buried since childhood. Convinced that spiritual people don't get angry. That night, alone in my sacred space, illuminated only by moonlight filtering through the window, I finally allowed myself to feel what I had denied for decades. I screamed into pillows. I wrote uncensored pages of fury. I let the tears flow. And something miraculous happened. Instead of destroying me as I'd feared, acknowledging this shadow part brought an overwhelming sense of relief. Like releasing a spiritual dam I hadn't known was blocking my life force. The energy that had been trapped in keeping this part of me hidden was suddenly available for healing, creation, and authentic connection. That, dear soul travelers, was my first conscious meeting with my shadow self. And it changed everything. In our modern spiritual landscape, we're often encouraged to focus on the light, to practice positive affirmations, to raise our vibration. And while these practices hold immense value, they're only half of the spiritual equation. What the ancient wisdom traditions understood, from Taoism to alchemy, from shamanic practices to mystical Christianity, is that true spiritual awakening requires us to embrace both the light and the shadow within. This inner work, the courageous journey into your shadow self, is perhaps the most neglected aspect of modern spirituality. Yet it holds the key to authentic transformation. So what exactly is this shadow self? The shadow contains everything you've denied, repressed, or disowned about yourself. These aren't just the aspects you consider negative or dark. The shadow holds any part of your authentic nature that you've been conditioned to hide, including your most magnificent gifts and power. This isn't about self-improvement. It's about becoming whole. It's about the sacred reunion of the fragmented aspects of your being. And that, beloved seeker, is the essence of true spiritual awakening. Part 1. Understanding the shadow. To understand the shadow, we must first understand the architecture of our inner landscape. At the center is your conscious awareness, what you know about yourself, your recognized identity. Surrounding this is your subconscious, the realm of memories, patterns, and influences that affect you, but may not be in your immediate awareness. Then we have the shadow realm, those aspects of yourself that at some point became too painful, too frightening, or too contrary to your self-image to acknowledge. These parts didn't disappear. They were simply pushed into the darkness. And finally, we have what the great psychologist Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, the shared spiritual inheritance of all humanity, containing the archetypes and ancient wisdom that connect us all. Your shadow began forming in early childhood. Perhaps you expressed your natural joy and spontaneity, only to be told, "Quiet down, don't be so loud." Or maybe you showed anger when your boundaries were crossed and heard, "Good children don't get angry." Over time, these messages from parents, teachers, religious institutions, and culture taught you which parts of yourself were acceptable and which needed to be hidden away. Even in spiritual communities, we create shadows. Enlightened people don't feel jealousy. Advanced souls have transcended desire. True masters never express doubt. These judgments force aspects of our humanity into the shadow, where they don't disappear, they grow stronger in the dark. How do you know when your shadow is active? There are several sacred messengers. First is projection. When you have an instant, powerful reaction to someone else's behavior, whether attraction or repulsion, you're often encountering your own disowned traits reflected back to you. As the ancient spiritual teaching goes, we don't see others as they are. We see them as we are. Second are emotional reactions that seem disproportionate to the situation. When a minor comment sends you into a spiral of rage, or a small criticism crushes your spirit for days, your shadow is speaking. Third are recurring patterns, the relationship dynamics that follow you everywhere, the self-sabotage that appears just as you're about to succeed. These are shadow elements orchestrating your life from behind the veil of consciousness. And finally, dreams and physical sensations. The shadow speaks through nighttime visions and through the body, chronic tension, unexplained illness, and sensations that arise during meditation or spiritual practice. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's the keeper of your wholeness, desperately trying to bring you back to your complete self. Part 2. Misconceptions about the shadow. Before we journey further, we must clear away 3 common misconceptions that block true shadow work. First misconception: the shadow contains only negative qualities. Many spiritual seekers approach shadow work as merely confronting their dark side. But one of the most profound spiritual truths is that we don't just repress what we judge as negative. We also hide away our most magnificent gifts. This is what we call the golden shadow, the disowned radiance of our being. I once worked with a woman who constantly downplayed her wisdom and intuition, believing it was prideful to acknowledge her spiritual gifts. In her shadow work, she discovered that her greatest fear wasn't her flaws, it was her own power and brilliance. This duality is beautifully represented in the journey of Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars. His shadow contained both his greatest power and his deepest wounds. His journey wasn't about eliminating either. It was about integration, bringing both aspects into conscious relationship. Second misconception: shadow work is about eliminating the shadow. Many spiritual traditions have mistakenly framed the inner journey as a battle between light and darkness, with the goal of eradicating the shadow aspects. But true spiritual awakening isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. The goal isn't to eliminate your shadow. It's to embrace it with sacred awareness, to reintegrate these lost parts of yourself into the tapestry of your being. As the alchemists understood, transformation occurs not by removing the lead, but by understanding its essential nature so deeply that it reveals itself as gold. Third misconception: the shadow is just an individual problem. Perhaps the most limiting belief is that shadow work is merely personal. But as spiritual beings, we participate in collective consciousness. Societies and cultures also repress and project collectively. Racism, environmental destruction, warfare, these are manifestations of our collective shadow. What we cannot face within ourselves, we enact in our world. This is why your personal shadow work is not just self-improvement. It's a sacred contribution to planetary healing. Each time you reclaim a disowned part of yourself, you help heal the collective field of consciousness we all share. As the mystic Thomas Merton wrote, "If I can unite the darkness in me with the darkness in you, then the darkness of the world is overcome." Part 3. The process of embracing the shadow. Now we come to the heart of our journey, the sacred process of embracing your shadow self. I'll guide you through 4 alchemical stages of transformation. Step 1. Shadow recognition, the courage to see. The first stage requires the spiritual courage to look honestly at what you've been avoiding. This isn't about judgment. It's about sacred witnessing. One of the most powerful practices is reflective journaling. Take a beautiful journal that feels sacred to you. Create a quiet space, perhaps light a candle, and ask yourself, what qualities do I judge most harshly in others? What parts of myself am I afraid to show the world? If people really knew me, what would they discover? Another profound practice is tracking your triggers. When you feel a reaction that seems disproportionate, anger, shame, envy, or even overwhelming attraction, pause and breathe into that sensation. These emotional flares are like spiritual breadcrumbs leading to your shadow. And finally, recognize that your closest relationships are mirrors for your shadow. The qualities that most irritate you in your partner, the behaviors you constantly try to change in your children, the traits that draw you magnetically to certain people, these reflect your own disowned aspects. As you practice recognition, approach yourself with compassionate curiosity. This isn't about uncovering what's wrong with you. It's about reclaiming the fullness of who you are. Step 2. Dialogue with the shadow, the art of sacred conversation. Once you've recognized shadow aspects, it's time to establish conscious relationship with these disowned parts. One powerful method is the empty chair dialogue. Imagine the quality you've rejected sitting across from you. Perhaps it's your anger, your vulnerability, your ambition, or your sensuality. Speaking aloud, ask this part, what do you want me to know? What is your purpose in my life? What happens when I reject you? Then change seats, allowing this disowned part to speak through you. You might be surprised by the wisdom it holds. Another approach comes from internal family system psychology. This perspective understands that your psyche contains many parts, like an inner family. Each aspect of your shadow, was originally trying to protect you in some way. For example, the part that shuts down your joy might have been protecting you from disappointment. The part that hides your power might have been keeping you safe from rejection. When approached with curiosity rather than condemnation, these parts reveal their loving intentions. Let me guide you through a brief shadow meditation to demonstrate. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable. Take 3 deep breaths, feeling your body relaxing with each exhale. Imagine a door before you. This is the threshold to your shadow realm. As you open this door, you're met by an aspect of yourself you've been avoiding. Without judgment, simply observe this aspect. Notice its form, its energy. Does it appear as a figure, a color, a sensation? With compassion, ask this part, what do you need from me? What have you been trying to tell me? Listen deeply to whatever arises. Now imagine extending acceptance to this part of yourself. Perhaps embracing it, or simply sitting beside it in peaceful acknowledgement. As you prepare to return, know that you can revisit this dialogue anytime. Step 3. Integration and transformation, the alchemy of acceptance. The third stage is where profound spiritual alchemy occurs. This is the sacred practice of integration. Remember this spiritual truth. What we resist persists. What we embrace transforms. Integration begins with radical acceptance, not resignation, but the courageous acknowledgement that all aspects of your experience are valid parts of your journey. Even your anger carries wisdom about your boundaries. Your grief holds your capacity for love. Your fear protects what you value most. Your desire points toward your life force. These aren't obstacles to your spiritual growth. They are the very substance of your humanity, the raw material for your awakening. Practice speaking to your shadow aspects as you would to a beloved child who's trying their best. I see you. I understand why you're here. There's room for you in my he. Part 4. Challenges and solutions. The path of shadow work is not always smooth. Let's honor the challenges that arise and explore how to navigate them with grace. Challenge 1. Facing fear and shame. Perhaps the greatest obstacle is the fear and shame that guard the shadow realm. These powerful emotions can make us retreat just as we approach our deeper truth. Build psychological and spiritual safety by starting with smaller, less charged shadow aspects. Like building a muscle, start where you are and gradually increase your capacity. Consider working with a skilled therapist, spiritual director, or shadow work facilitator, especially when exploring trauma-related shadows. Having a compassionate witness can provide the sacred container needed for deeper exploration. Remember that shadow work is most effective with an incremental approach. Small steps create sustainable change and prevent overwhelm. Challenge 2. Internal resistance. Often, just as we begin this work, powerful internal resistance arises. This isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're approaching something significant. Our psyches are masterful at protection. You might find yourself suddenly too busy for reflection, or intellectualizing rather than feeling, or even becoming sleepy whenever you approach certain topics. Work gently with resistance. Rather than fighting it, acknowledge its protective purpose. I see that you're trying to keep me safe. Thank you for your service. I'm creating new safety now. Practice what Buddhists call bare attention, simply noticing without judgment. I'm aware that I'm feeling resistance right now. I'm aware of the tightness in my chest. I'm aware of wanting to change the subject. Challenge 3. Imbalance during integration. As shadow material rises to consciousness, you may experience temporary imbalance. Dreams might intensify, emotions might fluctuate, relationships might be challenged as you change familiar patterns. Know that this is normal and temporary. Pay attention to signs of overwhelm, sleep disturbances, physical symptoms, emotional flooding, or disconnection from daily life. Establish healthy boundaries around your shadow work. You control the pace. There's wisdom in the spiritual teaching that illumination comes gradually. We could not bear to see all our unconscious at once. Shadow work is not a sprint. It's a spiral staircase inward, a sacred dance of revelation and integration. Step by step, breath by breath. The importance of appropriate pacing cannot be overstated. Integration happens in waves, not all at once. Honor your own timing and rhythm in this profound work. Part 5. Transformation and results. As you continue this sacred journey of embracing your shadow, profound transformation unfolds across all dimensions of your existence. Personal benefits. Many who walk this path report a significant reduction in anxiety and depression. This makes perfect sense spiritually. When we accept all parts of ourselves, we need less energy for repression. The life force that was bound in keeping parts hidden becomes available for healing and growth. You'll likely experience increased creative energy and vitality. Many artists, writers, and innovators describe a breakthrough period after significant shadow work. When we stop fighting ourselves, enormous energy is released. Your decision-making transforms as well. When we're not running from parts of ourselves, we see life more clearly and make choices aligned with our whole being, rather than from fear or conditioning. Let me share Maria's story, a gifted healer who came to me struggling with self-sabotage. Maria discovered a shadow belief that she didn't deserve success because her sister had suffered from chronic illness while Maria remained healthy. This unconscious survivor's guilt had limited her for decades. Through shadow work, Maria didn't just release this pattern, she transformed it into a deep commitment to sharing her healing gifts, eventually creating a foundation that provides healing services to those who cannot afford them. Her shadow contained not just her wound, but the seed of her greatest contribution, relationship benefits. As we integrate our shadow, our relationships transform dramatically. We stop projecting our disowned parts onto loved ones and can finally see them more clearly. The blaming and judgment that characterize many relationships naturally diminish as we recognize that what triggers us in others reveals what we've rejected in ourselves. Our capacity for understanding deepens immeasurably. Having faced our own inner struggles, we develop genuine compassion for others' journeys. Most profoundly, our connections become more authentic and intimate. As the spiritual teaching goes, we can only be as close to others as we are to ourselves. When we embrace our whole being, we create space for others to do the same. I witnessed this transformation with a couple on the brink of divorce. Each partner was projecting their disowned needs and qualities onto the other, creating a cycle of disappointment and resentment. Through shadow work, they reclaimed their projections and discovered they could meet many of their own needs internally. Paradoxically, this inner wholeness created space to the genuine connection rather than dependent attachment. 3 years later, they described their relationship as more honest, passionate, and peaceful than they ever imagined possible. Broader spiritual benefits, perhaps most profound, are the ripple effects of our individual shadow work on the collective. As each of us heals the divisions within, we contribute to healing the divisions between us. Individual shadow work creates ripples of healing that extend far beyond our personal lives. We develop increased capacity for holding complexity, seeing beyond the simplistic dualities of good and bad, right and wrong, us and them, that fuel conflict and separation. Imagine a world where inner work is valued as much as outer achievement, where leaders are chosen for their self-awareness as much as their strategic thinking, where education nurtures wholeness rather than just intellect. This vision isn't utopian fantasy. It's the natural evolution of consciousness that begins with each of us embracing our complete humanity. What if your shadow was not the enemy, but the gatekeeper to your full potential? What if the parts of yourself you've been running from actually hold the keys to your liberation? What might be possible for you and for our world if we all had the courage to make this journey? We've traveled far together on this exploration of shadow work, from understanding how the shadow forms to recognizing its presence in our lives, to embracing it through conscious dialogue and integration. Remember the sacred spiral of this journey. Recognition, seeing what you've been avoiding. Dialogue, creating relationship with disowned parts. Integration, welcoming these aspects back into wholeness. Expression, embodying your authentic, integrated self. And remember that this journey never truly ends. It deepens. Each layer revealed leads to greater awareness, greater compassion, greater aliveness. Let me leave you with one final story. A woman in my spiritual community had spent decades pursuing enlightenment through various spiritual practices, always seeking the light, always trying to transcend her humanity. Despite years of meditation, service, and study, she felt something fundamental was missing. An emptiness she couldn't explain. During an intensive shadow retreat, she finally allowed herself to face the grief she'd been spiritually bypassing, the profound loss of her mother in childhood that she'd never fully mourned, believing that spiritual people move beyond attachment. As she finally allowed herself to feel this grief fully, something remarkable happened. Instead of being diminished by this emotion, she described feeling more present, more real, more connected to life than ever before. Her spiritual practice transformed from a means of escape to a path of embodiment. Her relationships deepened. Her creative expression blossomed. And most significantly, she found the authentic spiritual connection she'd been seeking all along. Not by transcending her humanity, but by embracing it fully. I invite you to begin your own journey of shadow integration today. Start with simple awareness. Notice your strongest reactions to others, your recurring patterns, the emotions you tend to avoid. Just this noticing, without judgment, begins the sacred process of reclamation. If you'd like to explore further, I've created resources to support your journey. Journal prompts, guided meditations, and recommended readings you'll find linked below. For those wanting community in this work, there are online and in-person circles where shadow work is practiced with skilled facilitation. Remember, brave soul, the darkness you fear is not your enemy. It is the unacknowledged teacher bearing gifts of wholeness. The most profound spiritual truth may be that our wounds and our healing arise from the same source, our magnificent, complex humanity. In the words of Carl Jung, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. If this journey has spoken to your soul, I invite you to begin your own shadow dialogue tonight. Perhaps under the gentle gaze of the moon, write a letter to a disowned part of yourself, or simply sit in silence and ask, what have I been afraid to see? In our next exploration, we'll journey into healing the inner child, the perfect companion to shadow work that allows even deeper integration and wholeness. May your journey into wholeness bring healing to yourself and our world. Until we meet again on this sacred path, walk gently with all parts of yourself.